What happens when a CEO goes undercover as a cashier and hears his own supervisor mocking elderly customers? Ethan Caldwell had built his grocery chain, Caldwell's Market, from the ground up. What started as a single store had expanded to 12 locations across the state. He'd always prided himself on customer service, but lately something felt off. Complaints were rising. Long lines, rude employees, and worst of all, reports that elderly customers were being mistreated. Corporate reports didn't give him the full picture. He needed to see for himself. So he disguised himself. He shaved his well-groomed beard into rough stubble, wore thick-rimmed glasses, and traded in his tailored suits for a plain polo and khakis. His name tag read Eric. Since many of his employees had never met him in person, blending in wouldn't be hard. Ethan chose the worst-performing location, a mid-sized store in a suburban neighborhood. The store manager, Rick, had been with the company for years, but complaints about his leadership had grown. Ethan wanted to see if the issues were real or just overblown. On his first day, the assistant manager, Lisa, showed him around. She seemed tired but kind, explaining the basics while juggling a dozen other tasks. The registers freeze sometimes, so be patient, she said, then hesitated. And if you hear Rick say something, just ignore him. That wasn't a good sign. Ethan spent the next few hours ringing up customers. Most were polite, though a few were impatient. He didn't mind. What bothered him was how tense the employees seemed, constantly glancing toward Rick's office. Then he saw why. Rick, a stocky man with a permanent scowl, stomped out of his office toward the registers. He hovered near Ethan, watching him work. Then an elderly woman approached with a small basket of groceries. She moved slowly, carefully placing each item on the conveyor belt. Rick sighed loudly. Here we go again. Ethan frowned. Everything okay? Rick scoffed. These old folks take forever. They count their pennies, ask dumb questions, and then hold up the line. I swear they should have their own damn store. Ethan's stomach twisted. The woman, hearing him, looked embarrassed. She fumbled with her purse, her hands shaking. I am sorry, she murmured. I just need a moment. Rick gave a fake smile. Take your time, ma'am, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Then, under his breath, he muttered, Not like anyone else has places to be. Ethan clenched his jaw, his heart pounded. This was worse than he expected. Lisa, standing nearby, shot Ethan an apologetic look but said nothing. She looked afraid. Ethan forced himself to stay calm. He finished ringing up the woman's groceries and gently placed them in her cart. Take your time, ma'am, he said sincerely. No rush at all. She smiled at him gratefully and shuffled away. Rick shook his head. You'll learn, kid, he said. These seniors are a waste of time. They spend money and they slow everything down. Ethan wanted to snap right then and there, but he had to see how deep this problem went. So he stayed quiet for now. Ethan forced himself to keep working, though his hands tightened on the register. Rick's words echoed in his head. Was this how customers were treated when he wasn't around? He watched carefully as the shift continued. The employees weren't lazy. They were overworked and anxious. Lisa managed the floor almost entirely on her own. The cashiers flinched whenever Rick passed by, and the stock clerks moved quickly, avoiding his gaze. Ethan noticed something else too. The schedules taped to the break room wall had strange patterns. Certain employees worked relentless shifts, while others had scattered, inconsistent hours. The names with the worst schedules were the same people Rick treated coldly. Older employees, quieter workers, and anyone who didn't laugh at his jokes. Then there was Lisa. She worked non-stop, covering for missing staff, handling customer complaints, and even stocking shelves between tasks. Ethan saw her rub her temples, exhaustion clear on her face. At one point, she walked past Rick's office, and he called out to her. Lisa, what the hell are you doing? She turned back, startled. I was just... You're not paid to run around like a damn headless chicken, Rick snapped. You're paid to manage, so manage, and don't come crying to me about being tired. Lisa pressed her lips together and nodded. Then, without another word, she grabbed a mop and started cleaning up a spill near the dairy aisle. Ethan had seen enough, but he still needed to confirm just how bad it was. During break, he sat in the employee lounge, pretending to scroll through his phone. The other workers talked quietly, their voices low. "I can't keep doing this," one cashier muttered to another. "Rick cut my hours again. Meanwhile, his buddies get full shifts." The other cashier sighed. "Yeah, and did you hear what he said to Mrs. Thompson earlier? She's been coming here for years, and he told her she should shop online instead of wasting space." Ethan's grip tightened on the table. "I'd quit if I could," the first cashier said, "but everywhere else is just as bad." Ethan glanced at Lisa, sitting at the far end of the room, yet staring at her coffee like it might give her energy. He could see the weight on her shoulders. Then Rick walked in. Conversation died instantly. Employees stiffened, some pretending to check their phones. Rick smirked. "Why so quiet?" He grabbed a soda from the fridge, then turned to Lisa. "By the way, I need you to cover tomorrow morning. Greg's out." Lisa blinked. "But I already opened today, and I'm scheduled to close." "Not my problem," Rick cut her off. "Figure it out." He popped open his drink and walked out. Lisa exhaled slowly, looking down. Ethan had seen enough. That night he returned home, his mind racing. He had built this company on respect, on service, and now one of his own managers was tearing that apart. Tomorrow he wouldn't just be observing. Tomorrow he was going to take action. Ethan arrived early the next morning, but this time he wasn't just another cashier. He was the owner of this company, and today he was going to make that clear. He walked in as Eric one last time, scanning the floor. Rick was already there, barking orders at a stock clerk who was scrambling to rearrange a shelf. Lisa stood behind the register, exhaustion clear on her face. Ethan took a deep breath. He stepped into the manager's office without knocking. Rick looked up from his desk, startled. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Rick snapped. Ethan shut the door behind him. "We need to talk." Rick scoffed. "You don't just walk into my office, kid. Get back to your register before I write you up." Ethan pulled off his glasses. Then he took his name tag off and set it on Rick's desk. Rick frowned. "What are you?" "I'm Ethan Caldwell," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I own this company." The color drained from Rick's face. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Ethan didn't give him a chance to recover. He stepped forward, his voice firm but controlled. "I've spent the last 2 days working in this store, watching how you run things, and I have to say I'm disgusted." Rick swallowed. "Sir," Ethan cut him off. "I heard how you talk about the customers. I saw how you treat your employees. You mock elderly shoppers. You cut hours for workers you don't like. You overload Lisa while doing next to nothing yourself. And worst of all, you've created an environment where people are too afraid to speak up." Rick's expression hardened. "With all due respect, you don't understand what it's like to run this place day to day. I do what I have to do to keep things moving." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You think mistreating customers and employees is keeping things moving?" Rick leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Look, these employees should be grateful they have jobs. If they can't handle it, they can leave. Simple as that." Ethan's jaw clenched. "That's exactly the problem. You think this is about power. It's not. It's about respect, and I will not have someone like you running one of my stores." Rick's confidence wavered for the first time. "You can't just fire me." Ethan leaned in. "Yes, I can, and I just did." Rick's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. You don't know how hard it is to find managers willing to deal with this kind of work." Ethan's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "I'll take my chances, get your things, and leave now." Rick hesitated, but one look at Ethan's expression told him there was no arguing. He grabbed his coat, muttering under his breath, and stormed out. Ethan followed him into the main store. Employees looked up, confused, as Rick stomped toward the exit. Lisa stood frozen behind the register, her hands gripping the counter. Rick paused before leaving, turning back to the staff. "Good luck without me," he sneered. "This place is a mess, you'll see." And then he was gone. Silence hung in the air. The employees exchanged uncertain glances, some looking at Ethan, others at Lisa. Ethan stepped forward. "I know this is a shock, but let me be clear. This store is not a mess. You all have been doing your jobs under terrible leadership. That changes today." Rick's confidence wavered for the first time. "You can't just fire me." Ethan leaned in. "Yes, I can, and I just did." Rick's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. You don't know how hard it is to find managers willing to deal with this kind of work." Ethan's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "I'll take my chances. Get your things and leave now." Rick hesitated, but one look at Ethan's expression told him there was no arguing. He grabbed his coat, muttering under his breath, and stormed out. Ethan followed him into the main store. Employees looked up, confused, as Rick stomped toward the exit. Lisa stood frozen behind the register, her hands gripping the counter. Rick paused before leaving, turning back to the staff. "Good luck without me," he sneered. "This place is a mess, you'll see." And then he was gone. Silence hung in the air. The employees exchanged uncertain glances, some looking at Ethan, others at Lisa. Ethan stepped forward. "I know this is a shock, but let me be clear. This store is not a mess. You all have been doing your jobs under terrible leadership. That changes today." "You're the only person here who actually cares about this place," Ethan said, "and I trust you to rebuild what Rick broke." Lisa's hands trembled slightly. I don't know if." Ethan leaned forward. "You already have been. You just didn't have the authority to do it." She swallowed, then slowly nodded. "Okay." "Good." Ethan stood. "Let's go fix this store." Lisa followed him back to the floor, where the employees were still talking in hushed voices. Ethan clapped his hands. "Listen up. Rick is gone. Lisa is your new manager, and starting today, we're making changes." He looked at the cashiers. "Schedules will be fair. No more favoritism." He turned to the stock clerks. "Breaks will be enforced. No more overworking." Finally, he addressed the entire staff. "And most importantly, respect is mandatory, customers and employees alike." A few people exchanged wary glances, still unsure. Ethan softened his tone. "I know it won't fix everything overnight, but I promise you this. I'm listening now, and I won't stop." Slowly, one of the cashiers nodded, then another. Lisa straightened her shoulders. "You heard him. Let's get back to work." For the first time since Ethan had arrived, the store felt lighter. Employees moved with purpose, not fear, and as he watched Lisa take charge, Ethan knew he had made the right decision. Ethan stayed the rest of the day, not as an undercover employee, but as the owner, determined to set things right. The atmosphere in the store was tense at first, employees unsure whether to believe the change was real. But as Lisa stepped into her new role, something shifted. She moved with quiet confidence, checking in on cashiers, making sure stock clerks had help, and enforcing breaks that had long been ignored. Employees who had worked in fear now started to breathe a little easier. Ethan watched carefully, stepping in where needed, but letting Lisa lead. She had earned this. By midday, he called a meeting in the break room. Employees filed in cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Lisa stood beside him, still adjusting to her new role but standing taller than before. "I know the past few months have been rough," Ethan began, "and I know some of you are skeptical that anything will actually change. But I didn't just fire Rick for show. Changes are coming, and I want to hear from you." A silence hung in the air. Then one of the cashiers hesitantly raised her hand. We've heard this before," she said carefully. "Management says things will change, but then nothing does." Ethan nodded. "I get it. Words mean nothing without action. That's why I'm not just here today. I'll be checking in regularly, and I want you all to hold Lisa and me accountable." Another employee, a stock clerk, crossed his arms. You say you're listening, then answer this. Why did it take you so long to see what was happening? Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. Because I got too far removed. I trusted reports and numbers instead of seeing things firsthand. That was my mistake, and I won't make it again. The stock clerk studied him for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Lisa stepped forward. Look, I know I was just the assistant manager before, and I didn't always have the power to fix things. But I promise you, I'm going to fight for this store and for all of you. For the first time, there was a flicker of hope in the employee's eyes. Ethan took a breath. Here's what's happening immediately. First, we're reviewing schedules to make sure they're fair, no more playing favorites. Second, everyone will get proper breaks, no exceptions. Third, I'm bringing in a regional support team to help Lisa stabilize things. A murmur ran through the group. One of the older employees, a cashier who had been with the company for years, spoke up. And the customers, especially the older ones. Ethan's expression hardened. They will be treated with respect, always. The cashier nodded approvingly. Ethan took a step back. This is just the beginning. There's more work to do, but I need you all to help shape this change. I can't do it alone. There was a long pause. Then slowly one of the cashiers clapped. Another followed. Soon, quiet applause filled the room, not loud, not celebratory, but a sign of cautious optimism. Lisa exhaled, a small smile forming. After the meeting, Ethan stayed on the floor, speaking with employees one-on-one. He took notes, asked questions, and most importantly, listened. He learned about the small frustrations, the broken register that had been ignored for months, the outdated scheduling system, the lack of clear communication from corporate. Small things, but small things added up. By closing time, the store already felt different. Employees weren't looking over their shoulders, customers were being helped with genuine care, and Lisa was stepping into the leadership role as if she had been meant for it all along. As Ethan locked up with her at the end of the night, he turned to her. You did good today. Lisa let out a breath. It still feels unreal. You've earned it, he said simply. Then, with a small smile, think you can handle it without me breathing down your neck? She smirked. I think I can manage. Ethan nodded. I'll be back, though, regularly. I've no more running this company from a distance. Lisa studied him for a moment, then extended her hand. Then I guess we have a deal, boss. Ethan shook her hand firmly. Deal. He shook it. As he walked to his car, he glanced back at the store. It wasn't perfect yet. It wouldn't be overnight. But tonight, he knew this was the company he had always meant to build, and this time he would make sure it stayed that way. Ethan didn't waste time. The next morning, before heading to corporate, he made an unannounced stop at another store in his chain, one with high customer satisfaction and strong employee morale. He needed to see the contrast. Walking in, he immediately noticed the difference. The aisles were well stocked, the employees moved with purpose, and the atmosphere felt lighter. Customers weren't just being served, they were being engaged. He stepped up to a register where a cashier, a young man with an easy smile, was ringing up a customer. The cashier greeted him warmly, just as he had the elderly woman in front of him. Take your time, ma'am. No rush at all, the cashier said as the woman counted out her change. Ethan felt a flicker of validation. This was how it was supposed to be. The store manager, a woman named Carla, was on the floor, chatting with employees, helping a stock clerk rearrange a display, and checking in with customers. She wasn't hiding in an office, she was leading. Ethan approached her. Carla, he said, extending a hand. She blinked in surprise, then quickly shook it. Mr. Caldwell, didn't expect to see you here today. That's the point, Ethan said with a small smile. I wanted to see what a well-run store in my chain actually looks like. Carla chuckled. Well, I hope we don't disappoint. Ethan glanced around. From what I can see, you won't. But I want to know what makes this store work. What's different here? Carla didn't hesitate. Trust. I trust my employees to do their jobs, and they trust me to have their backs. If there's a problem, we fix it together. If someone's struggling, we figure out why instead of just cutting their hours. And customers? We treat them like people, not transactions." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's exactly what was missing at the other store." Carla frowned. "Which one?" "The one Rick was running." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Ah, him." She shook her head. "I've heard stories, never worked with him directly, but I know his type. Power-hungry, thinks fear is the best motivator." Ethan exhaled. "Not anymore. He's gone." Carla crossed her arms. "Good, but I'm guessing that store is still a mess." "Yes," Ethan admitted. "Lisa, Rick's former assistant, has taken over. She's capable, but she's been beaten down by his leadership. She needs support." Carla considered this. "Then give it to her. Pair her with someone who knows how to run a store the right way. Give her a mentor. If she's got the skills but lacks confidence, she just needs guidance." Ethan's mind was already turning. "Would you be willing to help?" Carla raised an eyebrow. "Me? You run one of the best stores in the company," Ethan said. "I trust you. If you're willing, I'd like you to check in at Lisa's store once a week, help her stabilize things, pass along what makes this store work." Carla leaned against a nearby counter, thinking, "I don't want to step on her toes." "You won't," Ethan assured her. "She needs support, not someone taking over. You'd be there as a resource, not a replacement." Carla nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it." Ethan extended a hand again. "Thank you." She shook it. "Just make sure this isn't a one-time fix, Mr. Caldwell. If one store went that bad under your watch, others could too." Ethan met her gaze. "I know. That's why I'm making changes at the corporate level too." When Ethan arrived at headquarters later that morning, he didn't go straight to his office. Instead, he called an emergency meeting with his district managers. They entered the conference room, some looking curious, others wary. Ethan stood at the front, hands resting on the table. "Let's get straight to the point," he said. "I went undercover at one of our stores this week. What I saw was unacceptable." Murmurs spread through the room. One of the district managers, a man named Greg, leaned forward. "Which store?" Ethan's eyes flicked to him. "The one Rick was running." Greg sighed. "I had concerns about him, but his numbers always looked solid." "And that's the problem," Ethan said sharply. "We've been measuring success in the wrong way. Numbers don't tell you if employees are being mistreated. They don't tell you if customers are being driven away slowly over time. They don't tell you if managers are running stores through intimidation instead of leadership." A woman named Denise, another district manager, frowned. "What exactly did you see?" Ethan didn't hold back. He told them about the way Rick treated elderly customers, about the fear in the employees' eyes, about Lisa being overworked and dismissed. He told them about the toxic culture that had festered under Rick's leadership. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Denise exhaled. "That's worse than I imagined." Greg rubbed his temples. "We should have caught it." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "Yes, we should have, and it won't happen again." He turned to the projector and pulled up a new document. "Effective immediately, we are changing the way we evaluate store performance. It's not just about sales numbers anymore. Employee satisfaction, customer feedback, and leadership quality will weigh just as heavily." He clicked to the next slide. "Every store will have anonymous employee feedback surveys every quarter. If a store has repeated complaints about leadership, we investigate. No exceptions." Another slide. "And starting next month, I will personally visit each district stores unannounced, not as a CEO, but as a customer. I want to see firsthand how each location is run." Greg leaned back. "You're really serious about this?" Ethan met his gaze. "I built this company on the idea that we serve people. That includes our employees. If we lose sight of that, we don't deserve to succeed." Denise nodded. "Then let's do it." No one argued. As the meeting ended, Ethan felt something he hadn't in a long time. Control. Not in the way Rick had wanted it, through fear and intimidation, but real control, a clear direction. That evening, as he left the office, he checked his phone. A message from Lisa. First full day without Rick feels different. In a good way. Staff is still adjusting, but we're getting there. Thanks for believing in me. Ethan smiled. Keep going. You're not alone in this. As he put his phone away, he knew this wasn't just about fixing one store. It was about rebuilding the foundation of his entire company, and this time he was going to make sure it was done right.